All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I think we've all had points in time where our mind just wanders. We're just not in the right headspace. And, we're getting older as millennials. We're working more than ever. And the errant thought in your mind is just, where is my mind? I just don't know where I am most of the time. You know what I mean?
Sorry, what?
Can you hear me? Are you too
Yeah, I
far
can.
gone,
Yeah.
Brian? Is your mind out of focus?
What?
Brian, I think you're having a hard time hearing what I'm trying to say. Where is your mind, Brian?
Where is my mind?
That's the thing, Brian. As I believe a famous band, Nirvana, once said, where is my mind?
Classic Nirvana. Architects of the quiet, loud, quiet.
All right, with that intro out of the way, speaking of where is my mind, let's get into our review for this week, which is the 2021 movie Malignant. But before we get into our review, Brian, you had the amazing idea of having a new segment for this podcast. I believe it's called the Cringe Millennial Moment of the Week. I'm going to put like the air horns in the background somewhere.
The World Star air horns.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'll do the Vine boom or something like. I'll figure it out. But yes, that is our new segment for this series. And you know what? That's the thing, right? Is that all generations are cringe, but let's be honest, elderly millennials are very, very cringy. Maybe the most cringy generation, you could argue.
I think I might say that.
Exactly. And speaking of a cringe elderly millennial, I will put this in the episode description and as well on the YouTube link at the very least. Here is our image for this week's cringe millennial moment. I found this as a repost on Twitter from the Blunder Years subreddit, and the post title is "Me in 2004, when all I ever watched was Fight Club and The Matrix while blasting the Prodigy's Smack My Bitch Up. So cool, I had to wear 2 sunglasses." And it's a picture of a guy who looks like Chester Bennington with like even spikier hair somehow.
Extremely spiky hair.
And I think it's shot in his bathroom, but there's a bass guitar in the background.
Yeah, this is definitely in a bathroom.
This guy rocks. I just need to say that this is dude's rock moment right here.
This is an incredibly cool guy. My favorite thing about it, I think, is the ugly, the fluorescent lighting, which I'm currently under similar lights right now.
This guy was like fucking 16 when he took this picture. He's like, man, I'm so fucking badass.
He's like, I'm so fucking cool. The thing is, I kind of wonder, what do you think the response at his school or by his family was like? Because this is very 2004, but like, this is not like day to day wear. This is like, you're going out to like a rave or a cornfield or whatever we did in 2004.
Oh, yeah, no, this guy looks like he would fit right in like an early 2000s horror movie like victim. That's what he looks like to me.
He would be like the cool bad boy in like not very good slasher movie of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, a movie called like The Stalkerer or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's like, yo, man, like, I was told the Stalkerer was here, but I heard that was bullshit, dude. And he looks exactly
Ain't no
like
motherfucking bitch ass gonna stalker me. I'll fuck him up.
And then he comes right behind him with like a fucking scythe and cuts his head off.
Knife through the neck, yeah.
He looks exactly like this guy. Oh, shit. But no, so this guy rocks. Clearly, he is an elderly millennial. You can very clearly tell just by everything in the background of this picture. And you know what? Wherever you are, dude, I bet you your coding job is going very well right now. That's all I have.
Oh, this guy's coding for sure. Probably very okay.
Oh, no, this dude probably has like 2 kids and makes like $90,000 a year and lives in like a white picket fence neighborhood in like a major city.
Same exact hair.
Yeah, same exact hair too. Yeah. He probably wears like flannel now and wears the beanie all the time and has like a fucking just perfectly manicured like ginger beard or something like that.
Instead of 2 pairs of sunglasses, he's got 2 pairs of like reading glasses, one that he wears and one around the neck.
Oh, God. But you know what? Once again, though, Mr. Max Among Us. Amex? Max Amex? I don't know. That's a horror. That's
Maximax?
Also like Maximax. There we go. That is also like an incredibly elderly millennial name from like 2005. This dude rocks.
And the thing with millennials, and I think we can say this pretty comfortably because we are millennials. It's not a bit, you guys. We are of this generation, is that most generations, they're cool. And then the things that were cool from that generation get filtered down. And if you don't kind of adapt them, they become cringy. But I think a lot of millennial aesthetics, it's kind of baked in. There's this emphasis on like performative nerdiness and cuteness and kind of being soft, which this guy doesn't have. This is a different type of elderly millennial. But I think you'll see as millennials get older, that's what you'll really see like bubbling to the top, is like an acute awareness that you're online all the time, which this guy definitely had in 2004 already.
Oh, no, for sure. And you know what? Speaking of all those things you just mentioned, Brian, I think we should finally get into our review here because a lot of this movie's detractors say that about this film. So as I mentioned earlier, our review for this week is the film Malignant. Now, I recommended it for this week's episode. What did you know about Malignant before I recommended it?
Nothing. I knew after your recommendation that it was directed by James Wan, who I would say I'm mostly not a fan of, but then I also don't hate him the way that some horror fans do. Like, I feel like some people who are into some of the horror I'm into will like overstate how much they don't like his films. Whereas I think his films are mostly perfectly fine. But I did, up until the very moment that I watched this movie, I was thinking, I don't really understand why Taylor recommended this. It wasn't connecting in my head just because I knew nothing about it. And I know other James Wan movies. It wasn't connecting to the premise of the show. And when I was about 10 or 15 minutes into my viewing, I was like, oh, and it kind of hit me. Just a few minutes in, I was like, okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I wanted to review this movie just because this has been on the backlog for a long time for me. And, you know, we reviewed Exorcist 3 last time, which I found out recently from a couple of YouTube videos that my theory on this being like a kind of a quasi like American that movie being a quasi American giallo film is actually kind of like a well-known thing. And I wanted to find a movie that is like the most succinct modern giallo film you can possibly find, and Malignant is that, like, to the core. This movie is a movie that James Wan, when he set out to make it, he wanted to make an homage to the 70s and 80s European and American horror movies that he grew up with and loved. Like, that's very clear. And before we get too deep into other people's opinions on this film as well, because trust me, this movie's pretty divisive, and I know I told you that it's really between two camps of either people that love it or hate it. So the people that hate it generally don't understand the intention or don't understand the influences, and the people that love it generally do understand those things. And I think that James Wan being a, you know, especially nowadays in the 2010s and 2020s, he is like a popcorn movie guy. He makes like, you know, very successful movies by big budget studios that just make a shit ton of money. And I think a lot of his fan base are just frankly people that might not know a lot about film history in general. And I think a lot of people that came to see this movie at first just really didn't understand that. So that's where I think a lot of the negative attention for this movie came from, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, as I was watching this, what kind of hit me, because so I enjoy The Conjuring, the first one, pretty much up to this point, did not like any other James Wan movies I saw, but also didn't like hate him. You know, I kind of like would take his movies, particularly the later, like the Conjuring series, the Annabelle shit, whatever, and I'd think like that's a type of horror movie that has a really broad appeal. It's pretty well done for that. Dead Silence, he did that, right?
Yeah, he did Dead Silence, yeah.
And I was like, this has a really broad appeal. It's a specific type of horror that he kind of helped to pioneer. And it doesn't always hit for me, but a lot of people like it. And Malignant is kind of not of a piece with his other movies. And when it is, it's almost like, I think it kind of self-awarely like that. Like, there are parts of this movie, just in the structure and in the set pieces, where it almost seems like a response to like what people expect of him.
Yes, and in fact, Brian, in the special features on the Blu-ray that I have, he literally says exactly what you just said. He said,
No way.
I wanted to make an original movie that was not what the fans expected, and I wanted to sort of subvert my fans' expectations when they watch this movie as well. Like, he literally basically said that.
I mean, I think it shines through when you compare it to a lot of his more, I guess, commercially successful films. Like, this seems like a really deliberate statement because it stands out so much.
It really does. And before we get too deep into that, let's get into some details here because, oh my God, there's so much in the synopsis we could just talk about because this movie has a lot of shit to talk about, but let's get some details out of the way. So, as I mentioned earlier, this movie came out in 2021. It was rated R. And of course, we mentioned many times, it was directed by James Wan. The story was written by James Wan, Ingrid Bisu, and Akilah Cooper. Now, Ingrid Bisu is a name that I had not heard of until I did more research in this movie. She plays the, like, evidence person in the movie. The girl who collects evidence and stuff like that and is hitting on the detective guy early in the movie. Well, fun fact, she's also James Wan's wife in real life.
Aww,
so
that's nice.
Yeah, it's very adorable. She actually, like I said, she was the person partially responsible for the story for this movie. Apparently, the story of this movie was based on like her dreams and nightmares and stuff like that and various medical research that she looked up online at certain points. And James Wan's like, hey, honey, that's a great idea. Let me make this into a movie. And that's kind of the story of that. It's almost kind of like a passion project, which I really appreciate as well on both of their ends. So cool shit. And this movie was produced by, once again, James Wan and a gentleman by the name of Michael Clear. James Wan is most known for, just so many movies. He directed the first Saw movie, and he was also the executive director and wrote the stories for all of the Saw movies. He was the executive producer on all the rest of the Saw movies, but I think he only did the story for the second and third one, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, he's been involved in all the Saw movies. He's also responsible for all the Conjuring movies, the Insidious movies. We mentioned Annabelle, Dead Silence, the Nun movies, Fast and Furious 7. He was the executive producer of Megan, and of course, he directed the 2 Aquaman movies. So needless to say, he's done a lot of fucking movies, and he's made studios a metric fuck ton of money. Like, it's crazy at how economically successful he is as a director. Like, if you just count the films he directed, he's the 19th highest grossing director of all time. And if you count all of his properties combined, he's probably got to be in like the fucking top 10. Like, seriously, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, he really is probably the definitive figure in modern, popular horror of the last 20 years or so.
I would say easily.
So one of my issues with, so I love the first Saw movie, and I really like the first Conjuring movie, even though it's kind of dumb. Issues, I guess, with his wider style is that it, to me, always seems a little bit unambitious in terms of story. Conjuring 2 is a ghost movie. You expand on that with Annabelle and doll shit. I would say, like, it's all very, like, here's a premise and we're going to build on it. And one of the things that stands out to me about Malignant is that the story is not like that. It's not like a horror archetype, and it's not something that you can just paint an idea to. It's a pretty weird premise.
Oh, it's an incredibly weird premise, although a premise that is actually pretty clearly based on a cult 80s horror film that we will certainly get into in the synopsis. So it's not a completely original idea necessarily, but I will say for, a giant horror director in 2021, it's about as original as you could possibly get, and I respect the fuck out of that. And then speaking of original, so Michael Clear, I wanted to just get into him a little bit. He's not really known for a whole lot, but he was the producer or executive producer on basically a shit ton of James Wan's movies. And also he was the producer of the 2021 Mortal Kombat movie, once again, Megan, and he was an executive producer on a bunch of TV shows I never heard of. So just get his name out of the way, give him the credit he deserves. And the film was about 111 minutes long, so just a little bit shy of 2 hours, which, to be honest with you, I think this movie maybe ran a little too long, but other than that, I think it's mostly fine.
No, it's good. It's a very enjoyable horror movie. I think it makes sense if James Wan intended to subvert his fans' expectations, but I think for just a general horror audience, an audience that isn't necessarily fans of his wider overview, there's a lot to like here.
There is definitely some crowd-pleasing moments, but I'll be honest, the crowd that I saw, so just to get this quickly out of the way. So I saw this movie, I want to say maybe a couple weeks after it came out in 2021. It was one of the first movies in the theater I saw post-COVID. And I remember watching it in an audience, and I was laughing at parts. Most people weren't laughing. I heard some groans. And then I walked out of the movie theater and I was like, oh man, that was awesome. And then I just saw some guy and, I'm not going to throw words around that may be politically incorrect, but I'll just say he was a Caucasian gentleman who looked like he was appropriating African-American culture, if you know what I mean, Brian. And he said, oh no, man, that movie fucking sucked. And I'm like, oh, all right. I know exactly who the fuck this movie is for. Like, it was...
Yeah. Well, so you say you laughed, and that's one of the things that I think is important to get out of the way. James Wan, most of his horror movies are not funny.
Oh no, they're not funny at all.
They're not intended to be funny. Like the first Saw movie, the first Insidious movie, those are the ones I'm going to keep coming back to because those are the ones that I really like. They are not funny. This movie, though, reminds me, it's probably its closest analog in kind of that universe is probably Megan. Did you see Megan?
No, I actually just bought it for Black Friday, but I've not watched it yet.
So watching this, I think I kept saying to you when we were messaging and I was doing my first viewing of it, is everything is cranked up to 11 in this. All of the stimulators, all of the score is really apparent all the time. The acting choices are all really dialed up, and Megan is like that too.
Oh, yeah, no, I think you mentioned in the chat that this movie's very campy, and there are definitely camp moments in this movie for fucking sure.
The lighting, even, which is again a big part of, I think, the Giallo influence comes through visually in our lighting cues, which are very bright and very almost neon at times, which again is not what I think most people think of when they think of his movies.
Oh, no, for sure. Like, I guarantee you that people who are James Wan's fans, when they went into this movie, were like, wait, what's this fucking lighting shit? I was expecting gray and, like,
exactly
monsters and demons. And, like, I wanted to see the Darth Maul guy from the Insidious movie. And, speaking of Darth Maul and movies that made a lot of money, so this movie had a budget of about $40 million, but it only grossed $34.9 million, which, to be honest with you, once again, I'm surprised this movie made even $34.9 million, because this is not a very marketable movie in 2021 or even 2023. This is a fucking weird movie.
Do you think it got maybe a little bit of a word of mouth boost?
I think it did to a certain extent, but also I think part of what hit this movie hard was, once again, this movie came out in like mid 2021. So movie theaters hadn't quite adjusted to like the post-COVID movie theater slump. And even then, a lot of movie theaters haven't caught up with that in the first place, but it definitely wasn't the case in 2021. And I think what hurt this movie in particular was this movie also premiered at HBO Max the same day. I would think that probably hurt its box office quite a bit. But even then, I don't think this movie probably would have made its budget back. I just don't think it would have. So it just came out at a bad time, and that's pretty much the story of basically every movie in 2020 and 2021. I think Tenet was like the only movie that made a shit ton of money those whole 2 years. Otherwise, most movies made shit back then. And then speaking of shit, so unfortunately this is something I was very sad to see, but definitely made sense for, once again, the love it or hate it portion of the audience for this. But on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has a 76% critic score and a 52% audience score, which, man, 52% audience score. Those James Wan's fans, they're very common, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, let's take this in the most generous way possible. His movies, they're horror movies that, like I said before, they have a very broad appeal. And they're going to bring in a lot of people who aren't necessarily horror fans in the wider genre, right? So this movie, to me, and I didn't necessarily think that this was like a perfect movie or anything, but watching it, I definitely felt like this is like a movie that to me feels like it's for fans of the genre. It's kind of for people that can recognize certain homages and certain tropes, and they're like, oh, hey, it's kind of like that thing. And that isn't really generally the audience that James Wan goes for, right?
No, not at all. In fact, most of the people that I found that like the Conjuring and Insidious movies, at least in my anecdotal experience from people that I know that like that kind of stuff, generally they're not horror fans.
Yeah, not to say that's bad or anything, but it's almost the exact opposite of what I felt like this movie was sort of doing.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, never mind. Let's get into the synopsis real quick, because I have something to mention about the main actress. So yeah, let's get into the synopsis here. So in 1993, Dr. Florence Weaver, played by the actress Jacqueline McKenzie, and her colleagues Victor Fields, played by the actor Christian Clemenson, and John Gregory, played by the actor Amir Abulela, treat a violent, disturbed patient named Gabriel at Simeon Research Hospital, who is able to control electricity and broadcast his thoughts via speakers. After Gabriel kills several staff members, Dr. Weaver determines that he is a lost cause, and the quote-unquote cancer must be removed. And I also love that, by the way. He's like, we must remove the cancer. And then you just see the title card, Malignant. And I'm like, yep, perfect. And
this opening scene is awesome. It's perfect.
Oh, no, it is. I think somebody said it's almost like a Sam Raimi scene.
I had that same thought. It's so comic book in its like execution. It's so heightened. Yeah.
And also, one little cameo, I didn't realize until I was doing more research, but the nurse in this scene who's like, oh, don't go in there, he'll kill you. She was the female, like, hot as fuck mummy from the Brendan Fraser Mummy movie.
Oh,
And I was like, oh, I remember you. You certainly awakened some things in my childhood. I remember that. I remember that lady. So
I didn't recognize her. I know exactly who you mean now, though.
So I thought that was very funny. All right. And then, so we're going to cut back to present day. So once again, present day, 27 years later, Madison Lake Mitchell, played by Annabelle Wallis. Now, Annabelle Wallis was actually in the Annabelle movie. So she's also a very familiar actress to James Wan. And I feel like people that liked maybe the Annabelle movie or who knew Annabelle Wallis was like, I'm going to see the new Annabelle Wallis movie from Annabelle. And they're like, oh, nah, this isn't Annabelle.
Yeah, those films have such a shared aesthetic that people probably just came in expecting this to look and feel like one of those movies. And immediately when it didn't, they were disoriented.
And speaking of actually, so the aesthetic, so I watched the Red Letter Media review of Malignant, which I do have issues with. It doesn't really seem like Jay and Mike did the proper research into what this movie was trying to do, because as we said earlier, like, this movie is, like, very clearly it wears its influences on its sleeves, and they didn't really seem to understand that, which is kind of bizarre to me that they didn't understand that or get that. Like, they spent most of the review
kind of surprising.
They spent most of the review being like, is this actually like ironic, or is this like homage, or this aware? And I'm like, it's pretty obvious from watching the fucking movie. I'm just gonna be real here.
No, I mean, again, I'm not someone who particularly knows or cares about James Wan's films. I did, a minimal amount of reading about some of the cast in this just to see who had made it. But I feel like if you've watched a certain amount of horror films, from the last few decades, there's a lot that jumps out almost immediately in Malignant.
Yeah, exactly. And then also, I'm sorry, my point was, so in the review, they actually like showed various homages to other James Wan's movies, and the house in this movie is basically just the same house from those movies. I don't think it's the exact same house, but it's like got the same like layout and everything. So he did take the aesthetics from his like ghost movies and put it into this movie. So I thought that was very interesting.
I wonder if that was done out of convenience or if that was like, a choice, a creative choice.
I think that was a creative choice primarily because, and we'll definitely get into it in more of the synopsis, of course, as we always do, but there's a lot of shots in this movie that are actually like really visually impressive. Like, yeah. It's really surprising. Like, there's one scene later on that we'll get into, but I want to just foreshadow it here. But there's a scene where Madison's like running in the house, and it's shot from like overhead, like in fucking Hotline Miami or something like that. And apparently, so they shot this house on a soundstage, obviously. And they use like a tracking camera that they use to film like professional like football games, and they used it to track her movements in the house like that. It's really fascinating. So very, very interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so once again, Madison, she is a pregnant nurse living in Seattle. She's got a very big house for a nurse in Seattle. Like, that must have been an inherited house. Like, Jesus Christ. Yeah. As somebody who's been to Seattle twice, I don't know if you've ever seen the house prices there. Like, a 2-bedroom kind of dumpy house is like $1 million house over there.
You don't have a house like that, Taylor?
No, I don't, actually. I don't have one of those like modern houses that's like made of cubes and is like $3 million for no reason. They don't really have a lot of those in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Made of cubes is such a great way to describe a house.
Yeah. I've also called them prefab shit boxes before. But yeah,
that's a little more generous.
Exactly, right. But, well, speaking of prefab shitboxes, so she returns home to her abusive husband, Derek. During an argument about her multiple previous miscarriages, Derek smashes Madison's head against a wall, drawing blood. After locking herself in a room, she has a nightmare of a person entering their house and killing Derek. To Madison's horror, the killer attacks her shortly after, seeing Derek's corpse, knocking her unconscious. Now, I think this is really interesting because there's a specific line of dialogue about her husband, Derek, here, where he's like talking to her through the door after he just abused her. He's like, listen, just sometimes I can't control myself. And it's like, interesting. I wonder if that's going to be foreshadowing for the rest of the movie later. I thought that was like an incredibly foreshadowing moment, considering all the events that happen in this film. Like, it was just like, damn, okay. Yeah. Like, rewatching this movie, I'm like, oh, that was foreshadowing as fuck. We talk about campy, right? Like, campy and like just cheesy as shit. That's a cheesy as shit way to deliver like fucking foreshadowing, honestly.
There should have been like a music sting when he said, "I can't control myself," and then just a violin sting going dun dun.
Well, you know what though? Speaking of dramatic musical stings, so Madison wakes up in a hospital and is informed by her sister Sydney, played by the actress Maddie Hassan, that her unborn baby did not survive the attack. After being interviewed by police detective Kakoa Shaw, played by the actor George Young, and his partner Regina Moss, played by the actress Michelle Brianna White, Madison returns home. Madison reveals to Sydney that she was adopted at 8 years old and has no memories of her prior life. And this was the segment that I was mentioning earlier in the very clumsily incredibly well-crafted opener for this episode. Because, Brian, I'm sure you know exactly what the common stinger is in this movie, right? Whenever some sort of revelation happens.
What? Let's hit it.
It is a remix of Where Is My Mind by the Pixies.
I thought it was. Okay. I thought it was. And then I thought, no, it's not.
It literally is, though.
I swear to God, I thought it. Okay, and I didn't bring it up to you because I thought it would make me sound weird for thinking that.
Nope, that's literally what it is. And I actually remember sitting in the theater hearing that, and I thought, wait, is that fucking Where Is My Mind?
Yeah, watching it, and I'm thinking, like, is that, or is it? And I was just like, no. Because you only hear it for a second. You hear it really clearly for a split second, and then it fades into the rest of the music, like the rest of the sounds. And then you're like, maybe not. And I didn't even want to bring it up because it made me feel so dumb to even think that. Holy shit, you have no idea how validating this is.
Yeah. I remember looking it up after I watched the movie, and I saw on the soundtrack, I'm like, this has to be Where's My Mind? And I looked it up on YouTube, and it was the Where's My Mind remix from Malignant. I'm like, I fucking knew it.
I didn't even bring it up because it seemed so silly.
And that's why I talk about how cheesy this movie is, because that's just absolutely fucking hilarious to the people that know that. And I guarantee you nobody else in the theater who's groaning at this movie recognized that. I guarantee that. They're like, okay, whatever, this is a stinger. But to me, I'm like, oh, Where's My Mind? There's something about her mind here. Like, there's got to be something here.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I thought I was maybe going crazy.
Well, speaking of going crazy, so in the next scene here, we go to a woman running a underground Seattle tour, which, by the way, is a real place. When I went to Seattle for the first and second time, I actually did go on the underground tour. Now, I did talk to the tour guides there. They did not actually shoot the scene from this movie or the scenes of the underground in this movie at the real location, unfortunately, but they did a pretty good job of recreating it. I'll just say that. It fooled me. So yeah, if anybody has a chance when they're in Seattle, go to the Seattle Underground tour. There's a couple of them, but the Bill Speedles is like the original tour. That's a really interesting little tour, I'll say that.
I hear it's kind of harrowing.
I mean, it really is. I mean, there's a lot of history down there. I mean, like, there was like an old brothel down there. There was like a bank where like people like got murdered, trying to steal money from the bank and shit. Like, it's got a lot of history to it. I'll just say it. Not a lot of positive history, but some history to it. I'll just say that. So very good tour, I will say. And it was actually like curated originally by a guy who was like the original like Seattle historian. So, there's some very interesting elements that you wouldn't hear at a lot of other tours as well. So yeah, definitely a good like $15 like 1 hour tour. Very, very worth it, in my opinion. But anyways, the woman running the Seattle Underground tour gets kidnapped by a shadowy figure, who we later learned, of course, is our killer. And later on, Madison experiences a vision in which she helplessly watches as Dr. Weaver from earlier in the movie is brutally bludgeoned by the killer. Now, the killer is wearing a black trench coat and is holding a sharp weapon, which is based on a lot of common giallo tropes from the 70s. I mean, like, I saw Lucio Fulci and like fucking Mario Bava and like Dario Argento characters wear this shit. But also, a notable American inspiration was from the Irving Kershner and John Carpenter movie, The Eyes of Laura Mars, which the killer in that movie looks exactly like the killer in this movie. It's pretty wild.
I've never seen that. It's been like on the back burner for me for a long, long time, and I've never seen it.
Yeah, I didn't even know that I didn't even know John Carpenter was involved in any other movies than what I was aware of. So when I found out that he had wrote this movie, a movie that came out the same year that Halloween came out, by the way. So this was like John Carpenter's like fucking peak and like burgeoning era.
It's like when you're first starting out, you do a lot of work because you're trying to get something to stick, I guess.
Oh, no, exactly. And you know what? Also another connection to The Exorcist 3, Brad Dourif is in The Eyes of Laura Mars as well. Yeah, it's got Faye Dunaway, it's got Tommy Lee Jones, and it's got Brad Dourif. And once again,
how have we not seen this?
Yeah, what the fuck? Like I said, an Irvin Kershner and John Carpenter written movie starring Brad Dourif, Tommy Lee Jones, and Faye Dunaway. That's a Giallo movie? Fuck yeah, we gotta watch that.
Tommy Lee Jones pulled Brad Dourif aside and said, I cannot sanction your buffoonery.
Oh, no, I thought he was like, God, what was he? He was talking about Dr. Feelgood. No, that was a different Tommy Lee, never mind.
Tommy Lee Jones posted a picture of his dick on Instagram. It's huge.
He did a sex tape with whoever his wife was.
He did the Tommy Lee Jones, Pam Anderson sex tape. You think I can honk the horn of the boat with my cock?
Yeah, I think that one was right next in his filmography to The Fugitive, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong about it. Oh, shit. And yes, before we get too much more into our synopsis here, now that we've finally gotten our first horrifying murder here that we actually see, I want to talk a little bit about our killer's aesthetic here. So, as I mentioned earlier, very much based on like Giallo aesthetics. It's a very bloody murder scene, obviously, here. He's wearing leather gloves, face obscured, not necessarily masked, but face obscured.
Shadowy.
Yeah, shadowy, exactly. He's got a sharp weapon that he bludgeons Dr. Weaver with, is her trophy that she got for just how good of a surgeon that she was. But later he fashions it into like an actual like dagger.
It's pretty gnarly.
And he fashions it also in a very interesting scene where it's almost kind of like a metalsmith working on a weapon. It's actually like a really cool scene.
Exactly. It's almost got a bit of like the trope of like that you see in action movies, I guess, of like a hunter appropriating something that belongs to its prey. That's how I read that anyways.
Yes, exactly. And we do see a little bit of, once again, the killer when he kidnaps the woman running the Seattle Underground tour just for like a second. But you can see that this killer also has like very weird, disjointed movements, like, and that'll all come to play at the very end of this movie. Trust me, in a plot twist that I don't think anybody saw coming. I don't know if you, once again, we're not going to spoil it right away, but I don't know if you saw that plot twist coming at all, Brian. Did you?
No, I didn't.
Because I remember when I first watched this movie and like I wasn't quite expecting that, but I did appreciate it. But
I liked it, but I had to do a double take when it happened. I was like, wait, seriously?
Yeah. All right, but yes, definitely let's hold on to our thoughts on that one because, oh my God, that'll probably take up like 30 minutes of discussion once we get to that point. But finish the synopsis here. So during their investigation, Shaw and Moss discover a photo of Madison as a child in Weaver's house and learn that Weaver specialized in reconstructive surgery. Madison and Sidney approach the police after the former has a vision of the killer murdering Dr. Fields. The killer then calls Madison, revealing himself as Gabriel. Now, also, one thing I totally forgot to mention. So this Gabriel character, now, of course, will have a name. We'll just call the killer Gabriel from now on. Gabriel also speaks to people through like radios and like antiquated like sound devices in like a Jigsaw voice, which I think is hilarious.
That's one of my favorite things about this movie. There's little flourishes that the Gabriel character has that kind of, this is really close to almost being like, you know, a pretty standard slasher, but there's these little flourishes, both kind of like visually and then just things like Gabriel, you know, communicating through like these telecommunications that make it stand out. And they make it a little different from what you'd call a slasher. They make it, I guess, a little bit more eccentric, I guess.
Oh, yes, very much so. No, I totally agree with that. And also, you know, we're talking about modern slashers and standard slashers and stuff like that. Like, I want to expound a little bit on the whole Giallo thing, right? Because, like, most 80s slasher movies, especially 80s slasher movies, were very heavily based on Giallo films in general, especially the horror Giallo films. Because Giallo isn't necessarily horror, but that's mostly what a lot of people think of as Giallo or, like, horror films.
That's how its influence is felt in America, especially.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you and I are both very well aware of this, but there are two kills in Friday 13th Part 2 specifically that are literally ripped directly from a Mario Bava movie. Like, even the shot composition is exactly the same.
Because there's Giallo that leans more towards, like, the psychological, or more towards, like, I guess, like, the procedural, or even, God, don't anybody ask me about this. I'm just reporting here. Even sort of the erotic. But the influence of this strand of Giallo you're going to see reflected in American films is going to be horror. I mean, all these things sort of confluence, but like, that's how you're going to see it reflected back. So when we say Giallo in this context, we very specifically mean that sort of proto-slasher, woman in distress Italian genre.
And well, you're mentioning horror and police procedural. This movie is also very much a police procedural as well.
It is. That's another thing that I don't know, to be honest. If you hadn't said to me right off the bat that you wanted to do this as a companion piece, sort of to the Exorcist 3 episode as to like American Giallo films, I don't know if that would have been my number one reference point while watching it. But because you said that, I did become hyper aware of that. And the procedural element definitely stuck over. It's like, oh, this is like, you're spending a lot of time with like the detective, which is a thing you don't really do in an American slasher, but you might in a Giallo film.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Except Last House on the Left, I guess.
Yeah, right. But so Gabriel, his voice actor, he's actually like a very prominent anime voice actor, because like Gabriel's voice in this movie is fucking fantastic. Like,
is that true? That makes so much sense.
Yeah,
for real.
He's a prolific like anime voice actor, and you can clearly tell. But once again, though, I will say his voice in this movie is really fucking good. Like, it is very like unsettling. I think he does a good job.
There is that one scene where he accidentally calls a character Kakarot, which is a little distracting.
Oh, Jesus. So after that, Madison and Sydney visit their mother, and they learn that Gabriel was an imaginary friend Madison spoke with during her childhood, but may also be someone she knew before her adoption. Shaw later finds a link between the doctors and Madison hidden on Dr. Weaver's record journals, leading him to discover the murder of Dr. Gregory. Now, I think a lot of these like flashback scenes, and there's many of them, and it ultimately leads to our final plot twist of this movie. But I really love the sort of aesthetic of a lot of these like flashback records that Dr. Weaver has, because a lot of them legitimately do look like they could have been filmed back then. In fact, the special effects in this movie were actually done by ILM, if you know who ILM is, Brian.
I don't, to be honest.
They mostly do like a lot of Star Wars stuff. So a lot of the like special effects in this movie are, especially for the budget, because this movie had a budget once again of $40 million, which isn't a crazy amount of money for the kind of movie that this is. The special effects look pretty good.
This film looks great. And actually, when you talk about a lot of those, you know, I guess I don't know if you call them flashbacks records, looking of the time, they really evoke. So the way that this film is shot and the way that it looks aesthetically, it evokes very specific moods. So during like death scenes, there's all these kind of shadows and neon colors and what I would consider like a giallo look, right? But then there's like the lighting will change to this very kind of sterile lighting during scenes where you're with, you know, say the detective. And in these flashback scenes, again, they look kind of fuzzy. They look almost analog. It's a very stylish movie, which again, not what I usually think of when I think of James Wan or his type of horror.
Yeah, no, generally James Wan's style is, I wouldn't say like boring or awful or innate, but it's like competent. It's not necessarily standout.
Some of it's a little boring to me. And even I like The Conjuring and Saw. Like, I really like The Conjuring. But that is, you know, I think I've said many times in past episodes, boy, I hate how fucking so many movies are just gray now.
I mean, to be fair, to give Saw a little bit of credit, that movie had just such a low budget that there's no way it couldn't look like that.
Oh, no, it works in that movie. It does work.
It does work for the aesthetic of Saw, absolutely. But yeah, some of his later movies is like, okay, let's add a little bit more color here for sure.
And this movie is so colorful. Like, it is like, and I say this with a great affection, it is like comic book. When you compare that opening scene to Sam Raimi, or I think actually most of the villain scenes, the kill scenes, very Raimi-esque. You know, this movie actually, this is as good a time as any to say, you know, you point out the Giallo thing, but this also gives me like that creature feature vibe, like a late 60s, early 70s, like a Roger Corman vibe, kind of.
Well, actually, Brian, there is, I think, one of the strongest influences of this movie later on once we get to the final plot twist on that. So just hold your thought on that real quick. But I do have a point to add to that because you are totally correct. But so as several other scenes go on, the detectives enlist a psychiatric hypnotherapist to unlock Madison's memories. And I also think this was hilarious because there's several scenes, and we haven't really mentioned the dialogue in this movie. Like, this dialogue in this movie is very camp, very goofy. There's a lot of like jokes in this movie that I think actually are pretty funny. Like, at one point, one of the detectives calls Madison's sister like Wikipedia Jones or something like that, which is a reference to like a kid's novel or something. Or at one point when Madison sees the killer in her dreams and like does a police sketch of what the killer looks like, which, you know, looks like a fucking like horror movie monster. And she's like, we're doing an APB on Sloth from the Goonies or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
I like that.
Or even, you know, as we mentioned, the evidence person played by the writer and wife of the director, Ingrid Bisu, you know, the detective's like, oh, we're looking for the other half of this weapon. And she's like, yeah, I just gotta look for the other half. And it's like, yeah, I agree, looking for the other half or something like that. And he like walks away and she like, aw, like it's like a very cheesy moment. And then also Madison's dialogue is hilarious because it's almost like soap opera dialogue at points.
Oh yeah,
it's hilarious.
Her performance in here is so good. The one thing I can't overstate is like all the performances are great. The actors are doing good. They are acting so hard, and it's almost like Wan told them. Like I can almost imagine him on set going, "I need it bigger. You need to do it bigger," because the performances in this are so unrestrained. They're so not naturalistic. And I don't mean that derisively. I mean, I think it was a choice and the movie is better for it, but big performances.
Oh, absolutely. And then actually, before we get into the plot synopsis, I realized I actually skipped a point here. So before the psychiatric hypnotherapist scene, so as I mentioned earlier, Detective Shaw walks in on Dr. Gregory, or I should say post Dr. Gregory's murder, and actually captures Gabriel just for a little bit. And they have a little fight. They run around a little bit. He jumps out of the apartment. And also another funny moment is like they're on like a fire escape and he like falls in the garbage can, like hurts himself because he saw Gabriel do it. And he's like, oh, that's going to fucking hurt in the morning or whatever the fuck he says. Like some soy Marvel dialogue, but it's funny anyway.
Yeah.
And then he chases Gabriel into the Seattle Underground, actually, and finds like a secret compartment, which the tour guide earlier was like, oh yeah, there's like secret compartments somewhere that are alleged to be. And then like Gabriel just finds it by like kicking a wall. And they have like a pretty good like little action set piece going on in the scene. There's like fucking like fog and stuff like that. And there's like an old carriage or something like that. It's a pretty interesting little fight scene. I'll just say that.
We don't want to get, again, I know we're getting up to it. There are fight scenes in this movie. Like, it's surprising when you watch it for the first time.
Oh, yeah. And also the fight scene that, trust me, we're going to talk about for probably like a half a fucking hour. That fight scene is incredible.
That is really, more than anything in the plot, to me, that's the real twist of the film.
Oh, yeah. No, very much so. All right, but yes, now that we're all caught up again. So once again, the detectives enlist a psychiatric hypnotherapist to unlock Madison's memories at her home. Madison recalls that her birth name is Emily May and that Gabriel almost led her to kill her adopted sister, Sydney, in the womb. After Sydney was born, Madison forgot about Gabriel. There's like all these flashback sequences, like Gabriel talks to Madison on the phone and is just like, oh, you want me to kill my sister? I can't do that. Or like, you know, there's like a videotape that they play at like her birthday party and like she's talking to this mysterious figure next to her, which I'll be honest with you, the first time I watched in the theater, I was like genuinely unnerved. I'm like, what the fuck is this movie like trying to allude to? Because actually what I first thought this movie was trying to say, and spoilers, this is not what the movie is that like Gabriel is just like a figment of her imagination and she's just like murdering everybody. And that's kind of what I thought this movie was leading to.
I think it's doing kind of a red herring. It wants you to think that's going to be the twist, right? You're like, oh, it's a psychodrama. There is no Gabriel. There's no supernatural. Like they're kind of leading you on, I think, to think that.
Yeah, and that's also another common trope with Giallo is like psychological trauma. So, but yes, during her flashbacks, she gets horribly traumatized. She just starts screaming like, get me out of here, blah, blah, blah. So gets out of the hypnotherapist segment. The tour guide that we were talking about earlier, she's actually like tied up by Gabriel. Her mouth's duct taped shut. Like we don't really know who she is necessarily, but we see her in this like giant attic. There's like a fan in the background or something. Like it looks like industrial. But eventually after the hypnotherapist scene, she gets released. She is trying to get her way, you know, whatever. She, like I said, she gets her way out of the rope and like duct tape and whatever. And then she falls through the floor. And then plot twist, she's actually been at Madison's house the whole time with it. Not a plot twist I saw coming because it's a little goofy because like I said, you see like an industrial fan and it's like, where was the industrial fan in this like Victorian house? Like,
why did you have that?
And actually, that's also alluded to, by the way, earlier in the film. So there are scenes where we see like Madison's like second floor bathroom and you see like a window design that's literally just the fan. So you go back to it and I'm like, oh, they alluded to this earlier. So there's like a lot of things this movie alludes to that on a second viewing, you're like, oh, I get it.
All the pieces are right there. Which is another Giallo thing, actually. Like in the better Giallo films that I've seen, you could figure them out, you know, or you could pick up on, you know.
Oh, no, absolutely.
I don't. I'm bad at that.
But yeah, so once again, this mysterious woman drops from the ceiling and just lands on the ground, probably like 40 feet high or something. She's fucking hurt as shit. She's like a middle-aged woman on top of it. So yeah, this woman's fucked up. And then Madison just screams because obviously she's confused. She doesn't fucking know. We get back to the stinger, by the way, Brian. The stinger, which is Where's My Mind by the Pixies. And this time it actually plays almost in its entirety. So it's the most, I would say, blatant here.
I need you to understand how much I thought I was going crazy. And I thought, is that Where's My Mind? Because you only hear it clearly for maybe a second, and then it's a synthesizer score, and then it fades into a sort of like a hum, a pretty contemporary horror hum. But you hear that do 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 do, and then it fades away. And I thought, is that what hurts my mind? And I thought, no, it's not. I didn't even say anything to you about it
This
because
movie
I thought
gaslit you.
I thought I was being a dork, So I didn't even say anything about it. And then I forgot about it until you reminded me. When you said that at the beginning, I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because I forgot that I had thought that.
That's why the intro made no sense to you. That's why my intro
I was like,
made no
excuse me? And then when you said that, I was like, fuck, I did think that. And then I filed it away because I thought I was being R-worded.
No, actually, Brian, I thought you did know that. That's why I did the intro that way.
Yeah, I see that now. This literally drove me crazy every time it played because I thought, like, I'm trying to pay attention to the movie, and all I can think is that the fucking Pixies?
Yeah. Oh, man, that's going to be so funny listening back to this and just being like, oh, let me do this bit that Brian definitely knows. And you're like, wait, what the fuck?
I was so sure that wasn't what it was intended to be that I didn't think about it after I was done watching the movie.
Oh, God.
I thought a lot about the visuals. I did think a lot about how the score is really over the top, but everything in this movie is over the top.
So. Oh, yeah, for sure. All right. But yes, getting back to the synopsis here. So the detectives, believing Madison to be the culprit behind the murders, they arrest her while the woman revealed to be Madison's biological mother, Serena May, played by the actress Jean Louisa Kelly, is taken to a nearby hospital. So that woman running the Seattle Underground tour, she's really Madison's biological mother all along. Dun, dun, dun. Now I gotta do the pixie stinger there, but no. Yeah.
I have a question about this twist. There's a lot of little twists and turns in this movie. A lot of them I think you could figure out with all the pieces, I think all the pieces are there. I don't think there's any way to figure out that woman was Madison's mother. Do you think there is a way that an audience could predict that?
The only way I could possibly think that, and to be fair, this is just a common theme with all the women in these movies, but the woman does look remarkably like an older Annabelle Wallis. They all have bangs, yeah.
Skinny women with dark hair and bangs?
Well, even her sister's blonde, but with bangs.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So Sydney, while, of course, Madison is sitting in jail, Sydney visits the now abandoned Simeon Hospital where she basically gets a lead that, once again, Madison was adopted from there. And I also love the scene where she's driving to the Simeon Hospital because, yeah, this is once again almost like a very goofy, like cheesy horror moment because she like drives up to this spooky, giant abandoned hospital in the middle of nowhere. And then she like drives up to the very end of this cliff and parks her car. That's really funny to me.
Where is there a cliff by a hospital like that?
Yeah, like what the fuck?
What is this Scooby-Doo ass hospital?
And of course, like people were like, "Oh, is that supposed to be a joke?" It's like, yeah, no, clearly that's a joke.
Of course it is. And again, we're talking. That's the type of thing that you would have seen in the types of horror movies that James Wan would have grown up watching, and that you would have grown up watching too if you had any sort of media literacy. I know how like pretentious we sound when we talk like this, but it's really like just a little bit of media literacy. That's a thing that we can complain about with millennial consumers. No media literacy.
That will definitely be an upcoming cringe millennial moment.
I mean, we could do every episode on that if we wanted. We could relate every single fucking episode to, here's how millennials don't have any fucking media literacy. They can't recognize irony. They can't recognize satire. They can't fucking recognize tropes.
But speaking of tropes, so Sydney goes through the abandoned hospital. She finds the records room. Of course, Madison/Emily's records are immediately right there. Finds all the videotapes, basically just detailing exactly what she's looking for. And she drives back to her mother's house. And both her mother and Sydney watch the videos. They learn that Emily/Madison's mother was alive all along. They believed that she had died during childbirth. She was 15 when she gave birth to Madison/Emily. She was the product of rape. They talk about how like the mom thought that it was like a demon baby and a demon pregnancy. So she was basically giving up this child to be a ward of this fucking like weird hospital that like still doesn't really have much of an explanation other than they like take care of cosmetic issues with children, which why would you need a whole hospital for that? That's a little weird, I guess. There's got to be like a side story about this whole weird ass hospital, to be honest.
Imagine the creepy shit that goes on at the hospital that only takes care of cosmetic issues for children.
It looks like the hospital out of SCP or something. Like it's fucking bizarre.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so they watch all these videotapes. They see, you know, once again, Madison/Emily and Selena May earlier in like the 80s and 90s or whatever. And then eventually we get to one videotape where Madison/Emily is talking. She seems very scared. And then they pan over to her backside. And on her backside is a parasitic twin that we know as Gabriel. So that's the plot twist.
This is so awesome. I'm such a mark for an evil Siamese twin story. Can we say Siamese twin? An evil conjoined twin? Like, I really am. That's one of my favorite, like, weird horror tropes that goes back hundreds of years and somehow still survives. Also, just like the balls to in 2021 be like, I'm going to make an evil conjoined twin story. Yeah. That is a trope in horror, but you'd think it would die eventually because it's so out of pocket.
Oh, no, you're right. It is a parasitic twin. Yeah, like you said, Siamese/conjoined twin who appeared as a half-formed child facing off of Emily/Madison's back. Now, a lot of people say that this movie is very similar to the Frank Henenlotter movie Basket Case.
Yeah, sure.
So that was the influence that I know a lot of people have brought up.
Probably, but I do want to say in Wan's defense, and I'm sure he's seen Basket Case. I'm sure. Basket Case is inspired by an old DC comic.
I'm not saying necessarily that it's a ripoff. I'm just saying that people have often brought this up as a very heavy influence on the plot twist of this movie.
I would also say that visually, this film kind of reminds me of Lauderdale.
You mean Frank Henenlotter?
Henenlotter, who's Lauderdale. But, like, have you ever seen Brain Damage?
Is that the Peter Jackson movie?
No. Brain Damage is a Ken and Lauder film about a guy who's got a penis-like protrusion on his body that comes to life.
No, I have not seen it.
It is awesome. It's his best fucking movie. It's so good. But visually, it's actually got a lot of similar, like, camera angles and colors to this film. Pretty impressive, but it is a body horror about a singing penis.
You know what? I'll definitely see that at some point. No bullshit. I will absolutely watch that.
You'd love it, dude.
Oh, Jesus. But yeah, so once again, we finally get our plot twist. So Gabriel is, once again, a parasitic twin/Siamese twin. Dr. Weaver, of course, we mentioned earlier, operated on Emily and was able to remove Gabriel's body except for the brain, which she seals inside Emily's cranium. And that's the thing, right? Is that, like, we also forgot to mention, so Gabriel can also, like, control, like, electric devices with his mind.
Where the fuck did that come from?
Very bizarre, but either way, that is a very important element about Gabriel's character. So he's like he control, once again, electrical stuff. He's like super strong, and he's basically like a parasitic organism that's slowly killing Emily/Madison from the inside. So the doctors are just like, all right, fuck it. We're basically going to kill as much of Gabriel as we possibly can and just stick whatever is left inside of her fucking brain. In a pretty good looking surgical scene, by the way. And most of the special effects in this movie that were not obviously, like the scene transitions, were almost done entirely practical, including the actual Gabriel parasite, which I think outside of a couple digital effects to make it look a little bit more realistic is all practical.
Looks great. That's the thing that I think we've said before. I mean, I know that we'll never get a lot of practical effects again because it's just become so cheap to do everything in CG. It's so cheap and it's so fast now. But I mean, a practical effect, even a bad one, even a cheap one, is always going to look better in the long run than CG, unless it's like James Cameron level CG. And I think there's a real awareness. James Wan clearly has seen enough creature features, enough horror films to understand that a practical effect puppet monster still looks present, even if it's weird. You know, it still looks like a thing you can touch, which CG often doesn't to me.
Oh, no. And, like, when I saw this in the theaters for the first time, I literally had to go under my breath. I was like, oh, shit. Like, it just, like, genuinely took me by surprise.
It's so frustrating to me that you saw this in a theater and people were bummed out about it. Because to me, okay, if I see this in the theater and I'm coming out of COVID, and again, I'm not particularly a James Wan fan. I didn't think this was, like, the best movie ever. You know what I mean? But if I had seen this in a theater after not seeing any horror movies for a fucking year and a half on the big screen, I would have lost my fucking mind.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I was genuinely very impressed by this plot twist and just the movie in general. Like, I'm not going to say, once again, I agree with you. I'm not going to say this is my favorite horror movie of all time or anything like that, but this is a pretty good fucking horror movie, especially with the dead zone that was 2020 and 2021 for movies.
Exactly. A friend of mine, who's also a big horror fan, had seen this film. I told her we were doing it for the podcast, and she told me that her read on it, you and I are talking about it as homages to previous horror film generations, but she said that she kind of interpreted it as like a self-aware kind of commentary on early 2010s horror, which I thought was interesting. She felt like it was James Wan commenting on his own films. She said that it's kind of like he's doing like over-the-top versions of a lot of the same sort of camera tricks, over the top versions of like a lot of the types of scares, the kind of tension build scares, that she felt like it was actually like self-awarely like a parody or a pastiche of early 2010s horror, which was really interesting to me.
I can definitely see that. I'll have to watch this again and kind of see where she's coming from, because I actually do understand where she's coming from, but I'll have to formulate that a little bit more.
That's what I thought too, is like, because she told me that actually just last night, and I was like, oh, okay. And I kind of sat with it and thought that makes some sense, but I wasn't thinking that at all when I watched it,
No, exactly. All right, but now that we finally got the plot twist here. So Gabriel, inside of Madison's brain, remained dormant until her now dead husband, Derek, hit her head against the wall. Gabriel actually operates Madison's body backwards when he takes control, explaining his unnatural movements and the upside-down handprints at the various crime scenes. So interestingly enough, actually, to get the Gabriel, motion while controlling Madison, they actually did get, real contortionists to, try to do, the weird, walking backwards things and the curling the hand stuff.
That's so cool.
They actually got two different choreographers. They did one for the female Madison, and then a male one for all the action stuff that they didn't do for CG. It looks fucking gnarly as shit when Gabriel is backwards walking in another body.
It looks awesome. And the thing is, too, you saying that explains a lot, because I was thinking, boy, the way he moves looks awesome, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. And the thing is, it would be so easy to not get those those contortionists to come in. It'd be so easy to just fake it, to just bullshit it with CG and call it a day, right?
Oh, for sure. 100%.
But you see in the finished product, because the way that Gabriel moves is so unsettling, and it's kind of hard to define. And it is creaturely, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, so Madison is in her jail cell. She gets harassed and assaulted by various inmates in there. And while that happens, Gabriel bursts out of Madison's skull. And that's the thing, is that every time Gabriel comes out, literally bursts out of Madison's skull, her brain is Gabriel's fucking face, basically. And, once again, the whole contortionist stuff. And then, there's 20 girls in this jail cell, and they just all get horribly murdered by Gabriel in a scene
awesome.
That's gnarly. A woman gets her head squished by Madison's shoe, and one person gets their arm busted in half, and the main inmate gets her eyes fucking gouged out and stuff.
I wanted to, at this point, I was holding off bringing it up to you. I have another potential inspiration for this movie that stuck in my head the whole time watching it, and here it becomes really undeniable, but it's throughout in the kill scenes. Hong Kong action cinema.
You mentioned that, and
what do you think of that?
Just real quick, I want to get two more scenes, and then we'll totally talk about that. So after Gabriel kills all the inmates in the cell, they get out of the cell, they go to the evidence room where Miss Ingrid Bisou is standing, as she has another scene in this movie. Gabriel gets all of his weapon and then his cloak back, and then we get into the police precinct fight scene, which in my opinion, I think is the single best scene of this whole movie. Now, I will say a lot of it was practical. So all the officers who were getting fucked up by Gabriel kills 20 police officers in the span of a minute and a half. It's insane. The action scene here is one of the best I've ever seen in a horror movie. It's amazing.
It's crazy. And I'm going to say, I said it earlier, this to me is kind of the twist of the movie more than anything in the plot. It becomes a really competent, not just competent, a really exciting, a Hong Kong action movie, that mixes gunplay and martial arts in the last 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, with a villain who looks like a fucking Giallo villain. It's just wild.
Yeah, who looks like fucking Kane the wrestler.
But also this scene, so all the officers were real. Some of it's CG, some of it's practical. But the Gabriel character here is almost all CG. It was actually mocapped by a real actor, but Gabriel was CG'd over it.
I can't complain about that, because it just looks like such a difficult scene to do.
Oh yeah, there's no way a contortionist could do that. I'm sorry. Doing it all backwards like that would be impossible.
To do anything resembling this, I was thinking about this as I was watching it. To do any of this in anything resembling live action with an actor, you'd have to take the whole production overseas, because that's why they don't make action movies like this in America. It's not legal because of safety regulations.
No, exactly. But the way the scene was shot, actually, was they used something called a Bolt pre-programmed robotic camera that actually, automatically tracked all the motions that were supposed to happen in the scene, and they had to be on mark. Otherwise, like the camera would like just butt up against somebody and actually like maybe physically cause damage. So this all had to be extremely choreographed. So I thought that was very interesting. And I didn't even know like a pre-programmed action camera was a thing, but they like pre-programmed it and choreographed it with all these cops and like the CG Gabriel person. And it's wild to see in the special features. I was like, this thing exists? Like
I didn't know that existed, but how many times have we seen like a really intense action movie made within the last 20 years that was probably using that? Because it makes so much sense.
Oh, no, it does. Absolutely. But yeah, so Gabriel kills like 20 cops in the span of a minute and a half. Kakoa and Shaw are the only survivors, but even then, they're both pretty messed up. But Kakoa's well enough to be able to still pursue Gabriel at the very least. And also, one final funny moment. After Gabriel kills like 20 cops, he throws a chair at both Kakoa and Shaw and hits them from like 50 feet away. That made me laugh in the theater when I saw that.
Well, like, so at this point, the movie has lost all the mystery behind Gabriel, right? You've lost all the mystique, which is what makes him scary. So it's almost like in a slasher movie, at some point, you know everything about the killer. You know what he looks like. You know his backstory. He's not scary anymore. This is almost like James Wan is aware of that. He's seen it. So he's like, well, fuck it. We're just going to go all in and make him a fucking martial arts badass now. And give up any pretense of him being like spooky, you know?
No, for sure. I think it fucking is awesome, and I'm just so glad. Yeah, you're right. They just basically gave up the pretense of this being scary anymore or like mysterious. So like, fuck it. We're just gonna go all balls in. We're gonna fucking just murder everybody as violently as possible in the span of like 2 minutes.
My friend who had seen this film previously, this was actually what ruined the movie for her.
Are you serious?
I know. And I said, I told her, really? Because she likes practical effects. She likes martial arts movies and shit. And she said, well, yeah, because it felt like it was from a different movie. And I said, I disagree completely. For me, this is like, I enjoyed the movie up to this point. This happens and you're like, oh my God, this is insane. This is ridiculous in the best way. It is in keeping with the movie. Like it is in keeping, I think, with the campiness of the film. And it's just a thing I didn't expect to happen. And it looks great. Yeah, that's how I felt too. This for me kind of is the final cherry on top where I'm like, okay, I'm into this.
Interestingly enough, actually, from the sort of negative reception I've gotten from people, almost universally, even the detractors say that this is like the best scene of the whole movie. So it's actually a very minority opinion on their part. I'll just say that. I mean, obviously, everybody has their opinions, but like, that's a very minority opinion. Like, even the detractors almost universally love this scene.
And I think that she was like, well, there was a certain mood, there was a premise I was following. I think she was kind of feeling the Giallo thing.
Okay,
and this sort of creature feature angle. But for me, like, I've already gotten all that other stuff from this movie, right? I've already gotten the homages to Giallo. I've already gotten the weird creature basket case angle. So now why not do one more fucking insane genre tip of the hat?
No, exactly. But no, I totally know what she means by that to a certain extent. But, at least for me, like an action scene like this, it doesn't matter what movie it is. Like to me, I'll just be like, fuck it. I'm here for it. It could be in The Notebook and I would be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially, like I've said before, I kind of think the 2020s, this has been, and I think will continue to be the decade of like an action film resurgence. And part of me just likes that this is in here. It just likes that it's another mark for action movies coming back, or action in films coming back.
Oh, no, absolutely. But yeah, so after this just onslaught, Gabriel then heads over to the hospital where Serena May is recovering from her captivity from earlier. Sydney and Shaw intercept at the hospital, but are attacked by Gabriel. And I also forgot to mention, you can also very clearly see it here. So, of course, as we said earlier, Gabriel is coming out of the back of Madison's head. Like, trust me, you have to look up this movie to the audience at home. Like, Gabriel's design is fucking wild in this movie. I just love it. Everything about it is fucking fantastic. And like Madison's face is on like the back, and you can very clearly see it's like it's very unsettling. It looks like a corpse.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's such a great body horror thing.
And so, once again, Gabriel attacks Sydney and Shaw at the hospital. Sydney informs Madison that Gabriel caused her miscarriages because he was feeding on her fetuses to gain strength, which I love that line, by the way. She's like, no, you don't understand. He's feeding on your fetuses to get himself back. It's a hilarious, cheesy piece of dialogue. And also, Gabriel flips a hospital bed on her, so she's saying this through like pained, like screaming. It's just a wild line to say.
Such an insane insane line to say at the top of your lungs. I also just love that when you get to this point, just the title of the film, Malignant, is such a you're like, oh, that was kind of they were really spelling it out in retrospect.
Exactly.
And you think that opening scene of the movie, and then you think of this, you're like, oh boy, it really was all there, huh?
Oh, Jesus. So as Gabriel attempts to kill Sydney for replacing him in Madison's life, Madison wakes up and takes back control of her body. And I also do love the scene. So yeah, Madison is almost entirely powerless throughout basically the entire time that Gabriel is taking control of her, except for this very moment. You see her hand trying to get control or whatever. And then you see what looks like Gabriel killing Sydney and then killing Serena. And then the scene transitions to black and you see the same thing that Madison was seeing when her mind gets transformed into other various places. And Madison traps him in a prison, a literal prison of his own mind. And she locks him away. I love the lighting in the scene, by the way, because just all pitch black. Half of her face is illuminated in the fucking bars of this fake jail cell or whatever. It looks pretty good, I'll be honest with you. I just love the shot composition here.
This is another moment, speaking about the composition there, the lighting there. To me, really, that's where the Giallo influence really strikes through, I think, is visually. When I think about Argento's earlier films or Bava, just this really bright, this use of a combination of, shadows and blackness and this really bright cutting color.
Just absolutely looks fantastic. And I also love her dialogue where it's you can't beat me. And she goes something well, I can't right now, but someday I will. And it's, once again, very soap opera-esque dialogue. And she locks the cell and Gabriel's no, it's just hilarious. It's just very good.
Pretty silly. I mean, I like it. I'm here for it, but it is goofy.
She's one day I'll be ready for you, Gabriel. And then just locks the door on him. And then in the final scene, so back in the hospital, Madison, she gets back her mind. We now know where her mind is. It's back in the real world. And I also love when she transitions back from it to the fucking head wound in her skull comes back together and she cracks her arms back into place. It's just great. And then she also lifts the hospital bed off of Sydney. She's you can't do that. It's listen, so that was my body strength all along. Gabriel just tapped it. And then she lifts an entire hospital bed, which, by the way, I work in a hospital once again. Those things probably weigh a ton. There's no way a scrawny 100-pound soaking wet woman is gonna lift that off her. But hey,
after
whatever.
Her body's been destroyed, yeah.
But hey, whatever. It's a movie. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I've put up with everything else so far. I may as well accept that.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then, Sydney and Madison are just looking at you even though you're not my blood, I'll always love you. And then the mom in the background, she's oh, that's beautiful. And it's okay, well, it's cool you're here, but you've never actually talked to our main characters before. It's very funny.
Yeah, what?
It's I feel I've known you all my life.
Very affecting. And it really added some emotional depth to this film.
Yeah. And then also the very last shot before the credits is you see a little light bulb in the background just faintly buzzing, which indicates that Gabriel is still there somewhere. And that's the end of Malignant. Just fucking great movie all around. I love it. I think most of the scenes work. I do think, I said 111 minutes. I think it might be just maybe a tad bit too long, but it's not enough for me to detract any points off of it.
Yeah, it doesn't overstay its welcome. I think it's longer than it needed to be, but again, I don't care. I had a good time with it, so spending a little more time, I'm not complaining.
Oh, no, absolutely. And then, speaking of things that may be a little bit too long and things you thoroughly enjoy, before we get to our final thoughts, I want to get into some Amazon reviews. So, Brian, I have 3 reviews today. I will say these are the best reviews I've ever seen. They're very informative, and I think they are very descriptive and helpful. I'll just say that. I think they're fantastic reviews.
Well, I'm sure that you've selected some reviews by people who have a good understanding of horror history. They understand context. They probably understand being able to appreciate a film on more than one level, both ironically and sincerely.
I would describe that as basically all Amazon reviewers, but these ones in particular, that's for sure.
Well, normally I just want to fucking die after the Amazon reviews, but yeah. I'm sure that after this episode, they'll just be a whole lot better.
Exactly. All right, but yes, our first Amazon review here is from M. Smith, who gives us 5 stars. And the header of his review says, gift. And the body of his review says, my son wanted is Xmas present. So fantastic review, obviously. Very descriptive, very helpful, very grammatically correct.
What did he rate it?
He rated it 5 stars.
Okay, so let's break this down. Do you think that he's reviewing his son's response to it as a gift? Then he's like, oh, my son was very happy with the gift, so it was great.
I think so, or it could have been saying, my son wanted is, which I do believe is a Morrissey lyric if you have brain damage. But, speaking of people that may be brain damaged and like Morrissey may be a chud, let's get into our second review here from David Ramirez, who gives us 3 stars. And the header of his review says, okay movie. And the body of his review says, I like it. Good movie. And then it's got the little clap film thing when they go cut as a little emoji in the review.
I'm going to tell you something. For an Amazon review, normally I'm used to these guys writing paragraphs, thinking they're fucking geniuses and having just the most fucking facile opinions I've ever fucking read in my life or heard in my life. So you know what? Glad you liked the movie. Thanks for keeping it short.
Exactly. And also thanks for spicing it up with an emoji. I wish he would have had a picture of his face and like a star background.
Picture
that
of
one guy.
His face from his like computer web, his like built-in like laptop webcam. Just glassy-eyed staring right in with the flash on.
It looks like one of the webcams from like one of the guys on To Catch a Predator or something.
Yeah, I liked it. Good movie.
Now here's a picture of my penis. And, speaking of somebody,
that would be a great Amazon review.
Yeah. Well, speaking of somebody who's definitely sent a dick pic, let's get into our final review here from W. Duke White, who gives this film 1 star. And the header of their review says, misleading. Wait, misleading? Oh, geez. Oh, God, what could it possibly be? Well, let's get into it. So the body of his review says, did not come with digital copy as stated. And that's it.
Well, I mean, that sucks, I guess. Like, does he just mean that they straight up lied to him? That, like, they sent him something different than what he ordered? Like,
I guess? I'm not entirely sure. When I saw misleading, I thought he was going to go on a 300-plus page diatribe on why this movie is not actually giallo, but apparently it just didn't come with the digital copy.
I thought, and I was just white-knuckling, just grabbing my jeans, just ready to be so annoyed. I thought it was going to be a fucking guy complaining about the twist, and I was like, oh my God, we've got a guy who doesn't understand the concept of, like, a twist.
But yeah, so that is our sole 1-star review here. Now, I will say I did try to find a lot of reviews that did describe, various aspects of this film. But to be honest with you, the reason I didn't include any actual I didn't include really bad reviews that go in depth too much is because, well, I saw a lot of the 1-star reviews, and I know obviously we were talking earlier about how we sounded elitist, talking about how people didn't understand a lot of things in this movie, but I will say 99% of the Amazon reviews were from dumb people who clearly didn't understand the references in this movie. Just dumb people. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, if you don't like this movie, that doesn't mean you're dumb. I'm not saying that. But if you think this movie is bad because you don't understand it, and you clearly don't understand it, then you're just kind of dumb. I'm just going to be honest with you here.
Like, I think this is one of our, like, my bugaboos with talking about media, and I think yours too, Taylor. I don't give a shit what people like or what they don't like, and this is going to sound really pretentious, it's going to sound really nerdy and fucking up my ass, but, like, if you don't like something because you aren't familiar with the reference points, then that's on you. I know people would say, like, well, a movie should be enjoyable even if you don't know what it's alluding to. Well, like, and I'm sure it is, but, like, for instance, this movie with Malignant, if you see the little tips of the hat to giallo, to, the Siamese twin tropes and things, if you're aware that that's coming from a thing in horror, I think you get more out of it.
Oh, no, for sure. Absolutely. Like, I think if you don't have, like, media literacy when it comes to its influences, this movie probably
seems like nonsense, right?
Oh, yeah. It seems like absolute nonsense. You're thinking, like, what the fuck is this soap opera-ass dialogue? What is this weird-ass, like, monster shit in here that just doesn't really make any sense?
And that's the real nut of it to me is I don't think the reason people would dislike this is necessarily because they don't understand the influences, although I'm sure it doesn't help. It's probably because they don't understand the humor. Like, there are a shocking amount of people, Taylor, and I am sure you know this as well as I do, who just do not understand that things can be self-aware and not be a parody. Like, they don't understand the concept of camp. I mean, for God's sakes, there's people that watch shit like Shark octopus or whatever, and they go, whoa, that movie's so bad. Like, they mock the movie, not understanding that it's the most base, like, trite, it's meant to be a joke. Imagine those same people watching this, a movie which is supposed to work on the level of both, it is like a creepy movie, a fun, scary movie, but also it's supposed to work on the level of being sort of a parody or, like a campy film. So if you don't understand that, then yeah, exactly. You're like, why is everyone overacting? Why is the movie why is the music ridiculous? What the fuck's going on here,
No, exactly, 100%. I couldn't possibly agree more with that.
And if your favorite fucking horror movies, I'm sorry, are like Annabelle, these movies that, to me, those movies, they mostly suck. James Wan seems like a cool guy, but most of these movies, Dead Silence, I hated Dead Silence. They kind of, at face value, their audience at least seems to take them pretty seriously and think that they're really scary, serious movies.
No, Brian, yeah. I definitely noticed that for sure. Like,
okay, it's not just me.
I think, as we mentioned in the Exorcist 3 episode and like the original Exorcist, like people that think those movies are scary literally believe in like creepy doll, like ghosts being real and shit like that. They literally believe that.
And I work with a lady who I like. We talk about movies sometimes. She is an older lady. She loves Annabelle and the Conjuring shit, but she also takes it at face value. Right.
That's funny, dude.
And that's most people that I meet who like those movies. They don't look at them as like, oh, it's a fun, kind of silly movie. That's how I see the first Conjuring, and that's why I like it. But most of the people that I encounter who really like those movies, they take it dead serious. And if you come into Malignant and you're taking it dead serious, you are probably going to be baffled by it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is not serious. It's insane.
Oh, God, abso-fucking-lutely. All right, so it's starting to get a little late here. I need to take my Milky before I go to bed and have to work my soul-crushing, amazing job where I get paid very well.
Your rewarding job. It's everything that you ever expected to be doing.
Exactly. To be fair, Brian, at least I'm not like Gen X who are like, oh, I want my dream job to work at a magazine or some bullshit that Gen X people want to do. I don't want to be a phony and work an office job. I want to make $11 an hour working at an online magazine.
I want to work at a magazine. We're definitely a format that'll exist in 15 years from 1995.
Yeah. But yes, with that out of the way, let's get into our final thoughts here. So, you know what? As I said earlier, I love this movie. I think this is a really good example of like American giallo. I appreciate that James Wan wanted to make a movie regardless if it was going to be successful or not, because from everything I've learned about James Wan when making this movie, I don't think he thought this was going to make a lot of money. Like the special features, he never talks about, oh yeah, this is going to be like a giant movie. He basically just says, I want to make a movie that's a passion project for all the shit I cared about as a kid. And I think he did a pretty goddamn good job for that.
And let's be clear, he knows how to make a hugely financially successful horror film.
Oh, for sure.
In this current moment. If he'd wanted to, he would have done it.
Yeah, but he didn't want to compromise on his vision, which I think is fucking awesome. And you know what? As much as Warner Brothers suck and as much as fucking Zaslav or whatever, as much as those guys are just giant fucking pieces of shit, I will say it's kind of cool that they gave him $40 million to basically make a movie that nobody thought was going to make money. I think that's actually kind of cool.
Well, so for one thing, he's made so much money on so many horror franchises that they probably just were like, all right, you know what you're doing.
Oh, that's actually a good point, too, yeah.
Also, he does have Atomic Monster, which is like his own production company.
Oh, that's right. I totally forgot to I'm glad you mentioned that, yeah.
So, he pretty much, this is Warner Brothers, but he pretty much was able to do it in-house. So they probably just told him, do whatever you want because he's made so much money. And then he didn't really probably have that much oversight because he's so experienced and he's working with his own production group.
Yeah, it seemed like that, at least from the special features that I saw, that it didn't really seem like they were like micromanaging people, like lording over him. So that was pretty cool, too.
No, I really enjoyed this movie. I probably wouldn't have thought to watch it, at least not, anytime soon. Have mixed feelings about James Wan. Like some of his movies, don't like very many of them. Had a lot of fun with this movie. Very good, modern horror movie. I think, again, if you like campy horror, if you like, especially I would say if you like stuff from the 60s to the 80s, there's a lot of allusions to various horror subgenres from that 20-year stretch there. Very visually interesting movie. Lots of weird twists and turns, and I don't just mean in the plot, but in the actual genre of the movie changes at various points. It's a really good time, and it's a movie that, first of all, like very out of sync with other things going on in horror right now. Like right now, within the last couple of years, we've got a lot of the horror as psychodrama stuff, things like The Witch or whatever. I know that was a few years ago now. Or you've got your like neo slasher things, your stuff like X or Terrifier 2. This is really of a different mind than any of that. This is very much like a big melodramatic kind of character drama horror movie. It's really not that different to me from, say, like a 60s Roger Corman film, except for, more stuff actually happens in it.
No, absolutely. Yeah. If you're a fan of, as you mentioned, like, Roger Corman, like creature feature, like if you like 60s to 80s films, if you love giallo movies, if you just love body horror, I think this is a movie that you should check out. And the fact that it's, streaming on HBO Max, it's a pretty easy movie to find streaming other places. Like, I think I got that Blu-ray for like $5 or something. Like, it's a pretty easy movie to get a hold of. So if you're looking for a cheesy movie for horror fans and a pretty easily accessible one, this is absolutely the movie to do it. So make this the next cult classic, please. All right. So with our final thoughts out of the way, let's get to our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. I have no other socials. That's my only social I'm going to plug here.
You can follow me at John Stab on Twitter. That's JONSTABB. Also, just want to let everyone know, Millennials Are Old. The show you're listening to right now does have socials now. You can find us at Millennials Are Old, spelled just as it is. There's a Facebook page, which I use to spy on boomer groups. Got some stuff working, reaching out to some boomers for certain things down the pipeline. Don't know quite when we'll get to that, but if you want to see us, the Millennials Are Old brand, talk and interact with Facebook boomers, so you can do it on Facebook. We also on Instagram, Millennials Are Old Pod, basically post the same content on both of them. I'd say the Millennials Are Old Pod one on Instagram, I would say look at if you're a Zoomer or a millennial, because it's Instagram and it looks better than Facebook. It's obviously easier to navigate. But again, if you want to see all the fucking weird pop culture groups that I've infiltrated, check out the Millennials Are Old Facebook page. Again, show continues to be on YouTube, but also on Spotify now. That's about it. Get on that Facebook group. I want to start getting these boomers to talk to us about shit that they saw when they were kids. To see how they feel.
And, speaking of boomers caring about what they liked as kids, I'm just kidding, obviously, but this transition here, we're going to be talking about, of course, the father and the son GoFundMe. So I think it's actually Indiegogo, if I'm not mistaken. It's Indiegogo, yes.
It is
Lucifer and the
Indiegogo.
Father sequel. Indiegogo. We're still going to plug it. It's still running till December 28th as of recording. Got about 4 weeks of that left. It has not reached its goal yet, but please, if you're listening to this and you have not donated, please donate at least $10, because you know what? I want to see a Lucifer and the Father sequel.
Scott and Sean, they're cool guys. They did us a solid. They came on. They gave us a lot of information, gave us a different perspective on their film, which I've now, and I think you have too, Taylor, started to apply to other things we review. Yeah, please ship a few bucks their way. They're working writers, actors, directors. They really wear a lot of hats. They're trying hard to make the movies they want to make. And Lord knows it doesn't seem to be easy right now.
No, it really doesn't. Well, speaking of, you said they wear a lot of hats. Not as many hats as you, though, Brian.
I do wear a lot of hats. Well, I'm in Portland. I have a rotating list of hats. I have a lot of hats that I don't even wear that often because they are too silly. Like some really cool ones that I just don't wear that much.
All right, speaking of wearing different hats, I think both you and I, Brian, are going to wear our hats to bed because we're going to go to sleep.
Definitely going to have a little nightcap.
Yeah.
Xanax.
Hell yeah. All right, have a good night, everybody. Good night, Brian.
Good night, Taylor.